Chapter 1. Isaac is late. Deep breaths. It was one email. Isaac could read one email. It would either be all his dreams coming true, or proof he was a failure of a human being. Well, maybe nothing that dramatic. But it would be disappointing. He should really wait to read it until after work, but now that he knew it was sitting in his inbox, he'd never be able to focus. "You can do it," he whispered to himself. He clutched the phone in front of his face, praying for good news. Stop thinking and go. He powered on the screen and clicked on the waiting email, holding his breath. To whom it may concern. Thank you for your query. While your novel sounds exciting, I don't think it's a good fit at this time. Best of luck. Don Malaz. Griffin Literary Agency. Isaac sank into his couch cushions. Rejection wasn't a surprise. This had been the 20th agency he'd sent his manuscript to. Still, he couldn't help hoping every time that the next agency would be different, that the next agent would love his story and guide him straight to the New York Times bestseller list, that he'd be that one in a million author everyone knew, that everyone would know his book and love it. His gaze landed on the magazine on his coffee table, a copy of Pop News. The cover featured supermodel Shawn Winters posed with a book in a cafe window, with some text about an exclusive interview with the model about what he does in his free time. It must be nice, Isaac thought, to have the whole world care about you so much that an interview about your hobbies was front cover material. Or even just to be pretty. Isaac was as plain as they came, with curly brown hair and no other notable features. Average height, average build, average face. And, according to the 20 rejection letters in his inbox, average talent too. His phone buzzed and he checked the new text message. It was one of the other managers at work, Olivia, asking where he was. Eyes wide, he checked the time. His shift started 5 minutes ago. Crap. Launching himself off the couch, he darted around his meager apartment to gather his things. He'd spent too long psyching himself up to read the email. Dishes still weren't done, he hadn't packed anything for dinner. Had he brushed his hair? Too late, didn't matter. Shoes on, phone in pocket, wallet? Where was his wallet? There, on the coffee table. He barely remembered to lock the door on his way out. Olivia was going to murder him. She had the morning shift at Barnes & Noble, and he was the closing manager that night. She couldn't take her lunch break until he took over. And he was 10 minutes away, 7 if he ran the whole time. He did his best to text and dodge other people as he ran through the city, darting around a jogger and almost knocking over a woman with too many shopping bags. His messenger bag knocked against his thigh with every step. At the corner, he panted hard to catch his breath until the light changed, and then he sprinted across the crosswalk. His side ached. He wasn't out of shape per se, but he didn't usually sprint for a mile either. The next street he turned onto was less crowded, much easier to run down. The only other person in front of him was a man in a stunning gray suit and black turtleneck, checking out the window display of the bakery. Oh, there was someone behind that guy, actually wearing ripped jeans and a tattered hoodie. Still easy enough for Isaac to avoid. The one wearing the hoodie wrapped an arm around the businessman's throat and yanked him around the corner of the bakery, down a narrow alleyway between the shops. Isaac blinked. Was he kidnapping that man? Was he going to kill him? He slowed to a stop outside the alley, glancing around for someone more qualified to handle whatever was happening here. No one else had noticed. Of course, no one else had noticed. Why would Isaac's luck be any different? Hand over the wallet, one of the men yelled. The hoodie guy, if Isaac had to guess. I don't have it, the other man responded. I'd give it to you if I did. Isaac peeked around the corner. Businessman was pressed up against the wall, open hands at his head. Hoodie guy had a handful of the suit jacket in one hand, and a gun pressed under businessman's chin in the other. I ain't playing, man. You've got to have something. Threats like these, I know you're loaded. Isaac pulled back, chest heaving. That hoodie guy was about to murder the businessman, and Isaac was the only one around. How fast could the police get here? He peeked around the corner again. Not fast enough, he decided, and took a deep breath. Chapter 2. The one time Shawn forgets his phone. Hindsight truly was 20/20, Shawn thought. If he'd known this was how his afternoon would go, he wouldn't have skipped out on work. Or he would have changed first. Or taken a different street. Or actually brought his phone or wallet. At least then he could give his mugger what he wanted and maybe save his life in the process. Instead, it looked like Shawn was going to die a humiliating death on this tiny side street. You can search my pockets, I swear, Shawn said. His hand shook by his head. Don't give me that crap, the mugger said. They shoved the gun under Shawn's chin. A guy like you probably walks around with hundreds in cash, and calls it chump change. I'd give you everything if I had anything, I swear. My pockets are empty. The barrel of the gun was cold under his chin, but quickly warming up. The mugger fisted a hand in his collar. I don't believe you. What was he going to do now? Was he really going to die like this? Fluffy, come back here, another voice yelled. It made both Sean and his attacker freeze and turn towards the main street. A young man jogged towards them, completely oblivious to the situation. His hair was brown, and he wore red hit-ups and dark jeans. Hey, have either of you seen my cat? Did this guy not see the gun in this situation? Great, Sean's terrible decisions were going to get some innocent bystander killed too. Terrific. Hang on, I think I see him. The man's gaze locked on something behind the mugger on the opposite wall. What the hell is wrong with you? The mugger asked, lowering the gun an inch or so. Just gonna grab. The man started, eyes still locked on the wall. It caught both of them off guard when he tackled the mugger, grabbing the hand holding the gun and slamming it on the ground. The gun clattered on the pavement, spinning out of reach. Call 911, the man said. Sean blinked, mouth falling open. This man saved him? Had there been a cat at all? Snap out of it, I can't hold him forever, the man said. Contrary to his words, it very much looked like he could, indeed, hold the mugger forever. He sat on the mugger's chest and pressed a forearm to the mugger's windpipe, cutting off his air anytime he struggled too much. Thick muscles bulged in his forearms, the sleeves of his button-up rolled up to his elbows. Hello? You okay up there? The man asked. I don't have a phone on me, Sean finally managed. You don't? Geez, hang on, the man said. He wriggled on top of the mugger, pinning an arm under his knee so he could free a hand to reach into his back pocket. He tossed up a phone. Sean fumbled to catch it. It had a thick case, but he didn't want to ruin his savior's property if he didn't have to. There's no passcode. Right. He called emergency services, reporting the mugging and the location. The operator promised to have a team out there in minutes, promising to stay on the line until they got there. The mugger renewed his thrashing. Come on, man, get off. I can't go to prison. They'll eat me alive in there. He almost managed to throw off the angel who'd saved Sean, but the angel almost crushed his windpipe in response. Geez, he's feisty. Could you pin his legs for me? Yes. Sean managed to grab both legs and sat on them, making the mugger swear and lash out again to little effect. If you don't want to go to jail, then you should have thought about that before attacking someone, the man said. Seriously, I am so late for work now. You? Sean only stared at the man's back in awe. What's up? He looked over his shoulder at Sean, revealing deep emerald green eyes and freckles. Sean stared, forgetting all about whatever he was going to say. Oh, you're not hurt, are you? I didn't notice anything, but I didn't really have the best look before. No, I'm not hurt. You got here before. Before a man shot him point blank for not carrying money on him, he thought to himself. Before Sean died in an alleyway because he ditched work like an idiot. Good, I'm glad. The man beamed at him. The smile was easy and sincere, blinding in its cheerfulness. Sirens grew louder, but Sean couldn't hear them over the pounding in his heart. There wasn't a cat, was there? Sean asked. Oh no, there wasn't. I made that up to try and throw him off guard. It worked. But why? This man owed Sean nothing. By his own admission, he was going to be late for work. And he could have been seriously hurt by getting mixed up in this. The man faced forward again. I saw him grab you. No one else did, and I couldn't just keep walking and do nothing. Oh, you'll save him, but you'll sign my death warrant? The mugger asked. The man pressed on his windpipe again. You made your own choices, now live with the consequences. Before Sean could find the proper words to thank him, flashing lights lit up the side street. A cop car pulled right up to them, 2 officers jumping out from each side and surrounding them. In no time they had the mugger handcuffed and in the back of the cruiser. The gun was picked up in an evidence bag. Sean and his savior were both questioned, giving their full statements. It wasn't like there was much to say, and with one cop questioning Sean and the other questioning his savior, it didn't take long at all. All right, I think that's everything for now. We'll get this guy taken care of, one officer said. Thanks. I've got to get to work. I'm glad you're okay, sir. His savior waved at him before darting back towards the main street, disappearing without a backwards glance. Wait, Sean needed to properly thank him still. He at least owed the man dinner or something for saving his life. Maybe backstage passes for his next fashion show? He missed his chance. The man was gone, vanished as fast as he'd come. Sean indulged in the crushing disappointment, letting his feelings sour his expression. He wished he'd gotten the man's name if nothing else. This may be presumptuous of me, One of the officers started, scratching his cheek with a finger. But you're Sean Winters, right? The model.
Saying, Sean Nadid.
Would you like an autograph? The man's face lit up. Do you mind? My daughter absolutely adores you. It'd make her year to get your autograph. Sean signed the back of an blank ticket for him, and one for the other officer as well, before he finally made his own way back to the street. The whole debacle had only taken half an hour, but it felt like days had passed. His adrenaline was crashing and he felt like he could sleep for a week. Maybe he'd dream about his green-eyed angel while he did. He needed to get it together. The man was gone. Sean missed his chance. The worst part about all of this was that he was going to get the lecture of a lifetime for missing work. And he couldn't play that I was almost mugged and killed card for sympathy, because then his father would actually hire bodyguards and Sean would never know a moment's peace again. He barely knew peace now. Frowning, he shoved his hands in his pocket and silently bemoaned his life. His right hand knocked against his phone and he stopped walking. Oh no. He pulled the phone out.
Oh, no.
This wasn't his phone. He didn't have his phone, that was why he'd almost died.
No.
This was that man's phone. The one Sean used to call 911 while the man pinned the mugger. And then the one Sean idly shoved in his pocket when the police came, because the mugger was thrashing again and Sean needed his hands to pin his legs until the officers had him. And then, apparently, the one Sean never took out of his pocket to give back. Chapter 3. Isaac apologizes with cookies. When Isaac made it into work, one of the part-timers, Lawrence, was behind the customer service desk sorting through a pile of books. Olivia was nowhere to be found. Lawrence barely glanced up at him, adding another paperback to one of his piles. You're awfully late. Isaac liked Lawrence, the college kid was laid back and well-read, and he could handle the toughest customers. Yeah, sorry. Ran into some trouble and police take forever. The half-interested sighed. I turned into a fully invested stare down. I'm sorry, police. Isaac waved the concern away. He clocked in and ran to the break room, throwing his bag at his desk and just missing Olivia sitting in the office, sandwich in one hand and phone in the other. There you are. The words were muffled around the sandwich in her mouth. She swallowed and chased it down with water. I was worried. What happened? Mugger saved a guy, everything's fine, enjoy your lunch. He grabbed a portable store phone and raced back out the door. Lawrence was on the computer now, looking up a book for a customer. While he was busy, Isaac did his rounds to check up on everyone else, only settling down when seeing for himself that everything was okay. He grabbed some cookies for Olivia and Lawrence from the cafe, not surprised in the least to find Olivia back on the floor already and tapping her foot impatiently. She snatched a cookie from him. You cannot tell me something vague about a mugger, and then run off without explaining anything. Rolling his eyes, Isaac gave a quick summary of what happened, handing Lawrence his own cookie to apologize. You're unbelievable. Olivia nibbled on her chocolate chunk cookie. Cries when customers yell at you, and then tackles a guy with a gun. His face warmed. That was one time, and it was the day after inventory. They did inventory overnight, so he hadn't slept and the store was a mess. You're never getting out of dealing with rude customers again, Olivia promised, checking something on her phone. She frowned at the device and then looked up at Isaac. Do you know where your phone is? My phone, he repeated, hand drifting to his pocket. His empty pocket. He swore. He'd tossed it to the businessman, but he'd never gotten it back, had he? Don't worry, I'm on it, Olivia said, typing something out on her phone. What does that mean? Isaac asked. Before she could answer, a customer came by asking for help, and the three of them dispersed to actually get some work done. Isaac did his best to focus on helping a grandmother pick out a chapter book for their grandkid, and not on how he couldn't afford a new phone. He'd almost managed to forget about it entirely, making another pass around the store. He spotted someone by customer service and adjusted his route. Hi there. How can I you? His customer service persona dropped as he took in who stood there. Stunning gray suit and fitted turtleneck, gorgeous dark brown hair. He didn't even look like he'd been assaulted an hour ago. Now that he was properly looking at him, Isaac would swear he'd seen him before, but he couldn't place where. The man looked up at him and shoved Isaac's phone out. I am so sorry. Oh, thank God. Isaac happily took it back. Thank you for returning it. I really didn't want to buy a new one. It was the least I could do after you saved my life, the man said. He didn't seem to know what to do with his empty hands, adjusting the cuffs on his suit and then shoving them in his pockets. I apologize for texting one of your contacts to find you. I didn't know what else to do. That explained Olivia's weird actions earlier. It's all right, I'm just glad to have it back. The man hummed. I wanted to thank you too for earlier. I did what anyone would, Isaac insisted. But anyone didn't, the man said. So thank you. Isaac's ears warmed. You're welcome then. I'm Isaac Green, by the way. Pleasure to meet you. Sean Winters, but you probably knew that. He scratched at his cheek just under his blue eye. The other eye was cool gray. Isaac's mind short-circuited. No wonder he looked so familiar and had the style of a god. He was Sean Winters. His heterochromia made him one of the most famous models out there. Not to mention his father, Eric Winters, the famous fashion designer behind the Phoenix brand. They had at least 3 magazines with his face on them in their newsstand. He just looked at one before he ran into him. How had Isaac not realized it sooner? Oh my God, he whispered. You didn't realize? Isaac whined. It wasn't really my biggest concern. He saw 2 people in an alley and a gun. Excuse him for focusing on the lethal weapon and not the literal supermodel it was pointed at. It's all right, Winters said. It's kind of refreshing not to be recognized right away for once. Isaac pressed his hands to his cheeks. I can't believe I met you. You're in my bookstore. He nodded. I am. I want to properly thank you for saving my life if you'll let me. Isaac cocked his head. You already said thanks. You're welcome, I guess. He chuckled. I meant dinner, or tickets to my next show if you want them. Dinner? Show tickets? What? The sheer surprise sent his mind off the rails again, obliterating his filter. You mean like a date? Winters's cheeks reddened, and he scratched under his eye again while his gaze drifted to a table display. Yeah, basically. Call me crazy, but I want to get to know the cute bookshop boy who saved my life. Maybe he really had been shot. That was the only way Isaac could explain Sean Winters referring to him as the cute bookshop boy. Olivia poked her head up on the far side of the desk. Answer him, dummy. Oh, yes. I'd like that. Winters smiled. Not one of the show-stopping smiles he used in magazines, but a soft, genuine smile. Does Saturday at 7 work for you? Did it? What was his schedule? Olivia slapped the counter. We'll make sure he's free. Thank you, Winters said. Do you have something I can write with? Olivia scrambled for the scrap paper they kept around the computers, pushing the whole stack and a pen across the counter. Winters plucked the pen and a single sheet off the stack, scribbling something down before handing it to Isaac. My number. Text me and we'll pick a place to meet when I have my phone again. He cradled the paper in his hands. I will. This time when he smiled it was one of his showstoppers. Heartstopper was more like it in Isaac's mind. Then he winked at him and Isaac's knees almost gave out. The prettiest man in the world winked at him and gave him his number. I'll see you Saturday, Sean said. See you then, Isaac breathed, watching him walk up the aisle and out the doors. I had no idea all I needed to do to get a date was save a model from a mugger, Olivia joked. Isaac turned to her. I'm going on a date with Sean Winters. Olivia laughed. Yeah, I saw. What the hell am I supposed to wear on a date with a supermodel? Isaac demanded. Her laughter grew louder. Chapter 4. Extra. Sean Winters is on a date. Did Sean have to pick the fanciest restaurant he knew for their date?
No.
Did he do it anyway to impress Isaac? Yes. I feel like I'm breaking something fundamental in the universe by being here, Isaac stated. He stared slack-jawed at the 3-tier crystal chandelier in the middle of the room, the candles on the tables, the priceless paintings decorating the walls. Compared to other guests, Sean would admit Isaac appeared underdressed. He hadn't worn a tie, and the black blazer he wore was a size too large, and he still had the red hit-ups and dark jeans. Sean didn't mind the jeans, even if they were a little casual for the venue. Isaac looked amazing in them. You mean you don't come here every Friday? Sean asked. Ah, 1 round of appetizers and I'd be bankrupt. Really hope you're paying, by the way. Of course I'm paying. That'd be pretty poor thanks if he made Isaac pay his own way. He gave his name to the hostess and followed her to a quiet table in the corner, pulling out a chair for Isaac. Isaac blushed and sat down. You're quite a gentleman. Sean considered that as he took his own chair across from him. I don't think about it most of the time. He shrugged. Consequence of how I was raised, I guess. There were a lot of consequences for how he was raised, but those were hardly first date conversation topics. Preferably, they were never conversation topics. I didn't mean it in a bad way, Isaac said. He fiddled with the corner of the menu in front of him. I think it's nice. Well, one good thing came of my upbringing then. Isaac bit his lip and dropped his gaze to the table.
Sean grimaced.
Sorry, forget I said that. No, it's all right. I guess with your father being who he is, Growing up must have been challenging. Challenging was the nicest word that could describe his childhood. There were a lot of expectations and a lot of pressure to succeed. They were interrupted by the waiter asking for their drink order. Sean asked for water and Isaac asked for iced tea, and once the waiter walked away, Sean took the chance to change the subject. How long have you worked in the bookstore? I started back in college, so about 6 years. I went full-time when I graduated 2 years ago. He bent the corner of the menu. You went to Wilson, the local college? What was your major? College had never been an option for Sean, and the culture fascinated him. I was an English major, with a concentration in writing. He smoothed out the corner he'd bent. Does that mean you're a writer then? It wasn't just college that fascinated him. Anything outside the fashion world intrigued him. Trying to be, Isaac said with a heavy sigh, propping his elbow on the table and setting his chin in his hand. Turns out getting published is not easy. How does that all work? Sean asked. They were briefly interrupted again by the waiter's return with their drinks, and then they scrambled to pick out their entrees. After the waiter left, Sean repeated his question. Isaac launched into an explanation of beta readers and literary agents and query letters, slipping seamlessly into the finer points of traditional publishing versus indie publishing. He used his hands when he talked, tapping the table and waving to invisible points. His face went through a range of emotions so different from Sean, who struggled to portray any emotion besides indifferent most days. Anyway, this is probably really boring to you, Isaac said, dropping his hands to his lap. Not at all, Sean countered. I read a lot, so it's interesting to hear how those books made it the shelves. Books were quiet and portable, something he could do waiting around on photo shoots or traveling, and they gave him a world to escape into that wasn't his own. Oh yeah, you had a book on that last cover, Isaac said. Sean tried to hide his grimace. This was why he didn't date. Everyone in the world acted like they already knew him because of the cherry-picked answers he gave in interviews. Sorry, is it weird to bring up your pictures? I have no clue about any of this. It's hard to avoid, Sean admitted. Pretending you haven't seen my face everywhere is just as weird. You are front and center in at last 3 magazines at work, Isaac said. But we can talk about something else. What book are you reading now? Sean gave a brief summary of The Liar's Dictionary by Ely Williams. Their food arrived after that, but Isaac prompted him to keep going as he cut into his chicken parmesan. Sean wasn't used to talking this much. Modeling meant his opinions were rarely asked for or wanted, and most people in his social circles loved the sound of their own voice and only needed the occasional nod or vague question to maintain a conversation. Isaac gave him his undivided attention, though, and then he recommended The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. It was on Sean's to-be-read list, but he moved its placement up. Conversation throughout the meal was easy between them, trading book recommendations at first. Over dessert, they switched to books they regretted reading, and after their final dishes were cleared away and Sean had paid the bill, he had the uncomfortable realization that the night had to end. He couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed himself so much, or wanted to be in someone else's company. Still, neither of them moved until the waiter started blowing out the candles on the empty tables around them, and they got the hint. They walked slowly to the door, stopping on the sidewalk outside. I had a really good time, Isaac said. Thank you. That's my line, Sean said. Do you think? I don't want to assume, but maybe we could do dinner again sometime? Isaac's jaw dropped. You want to? If you don't, it's fine, I just. No, idu. I just didn't think. They both stopped talking and looked at each other.
Sean chuckled.
I'll text you tomorrow. I'd like that, Isaac said. This was the part where they said goodbye and went their separate ways for the evening, but Sean found his legs wouldn't listen to him. He wanted to freeze this moment and stare at Isaac's gentle smile forever. But they did part, with awkward stammering and stiff waving. Despite that, Sean held on to the feeling as long as he could, cradling it in his chest. It vanished in the morning, when he checked the news and found his name trending. Who is Sean Winter's new mystery boyfriend? The thumbnail image pictured him and Isaac at the restaurant. His heart dropped to his feet. This was all kinds of not. Chapter 5. Isaac doubts everything. I'll get the article taken down, Sean promised over the phone. They shouldn't have even been in the restaurant, and they can't just print pictures of people without their permission. It's okay, I'm not worried about it, Isaac told him. Sean had called first thing the morning after their date, before Isaac had even seen the article.
Sean huffed.
Spoken like someone not used to the media. Trust me, you don't want the attention. Isaac pulled out a box of blueberry frosted Pop-Tarts. They don't have my name or anything. Yet. Ominous, Isaac said. He ripped open a pack and nibbled on a corner. It was a clear picture of you. They'll find you one way or another. But I'll handle it. If you really think it's a big deal. Isaac shrugged again. You don't understand. I don't date and I've never been caught on a date before. The paparazzi is going to go insane over this. Isaac still didn't see how they'd find him. It'll be worse for you, I'm sure.
Seriously, Sean, I'm okay.
Unless the problem wasn't that they'd gotten Isaac's picture, but who Isaac was. Dating some nobody like him probably wasn't good for his image. Sean let out a long breath. I have a meeting with PR in 20 minutes. It'll be fine. He sounded more like he was trying to convince himself. Isaac took another bite of his Pop-Tart. This whole thing was less about Isaac and more about Sean. Definitely didn't want his image ruined by going out with the retail manager. The Pop-Tart tasted like sand. Do you want to call off our next date?
No.
Well, I don't know. Do you? He was lucky enough to have gone on one date with Sean Winters. That was more than most people could say. This way he didn't have to worry about the inevitable heartbreak. Maybe it would be better. Sean didn't answer for a moment. Maybe. Let me get through this meeting and then I'll call you again, okay? Isaac smiled bitterly down at his Pop-Tart. Sure. If Sean didn't want to call it off, surely the PR team would. Okay, I need to go. I'll talk to you later. Talk later. Isaac hung up and ran a hand through his hair. It was disappointing, but what had he really expected? He didn't belong in Sean Winters's world. He had a waiting message from his mom, and he abandoned his Pop-Tart in the tiny kitchen and collapsed on the couch. She'd sent him a screenshot of the picture and was asking if that was him. Draping one arm over his eyes, he held the phone up to his ear with the other and called her. She answered on the second ring. Isaac? Was that you? Yeah, Mom. That's me in the picture. Oh my goodness, baby, you didn't tell me you were dating again. Let alone with Sean Winters. It was one date, he said. I ran into him last week and saved his life, so he wanted to say thanks. Wait, saved his life? Isaac recounted the mugging and nearly losing his phone, lowering his free arm over his stomach and playing with the hem of his shirt. And to say thanks he asked you out? He wanted to get to know me better, that's all. But I don't think there will be a second date. It didn't go well? No, it did. Last night we agreed we wanted to go on a second one, but then this morning, he's in a panic about the article. I don't think it's good for him to be with someone like me. His mom took a moment to respond. Isaac, baby, you are more than good enough for whoever you choose. He looked out over his apartment. It was small, all the furniture second or third or even fourth hand, and there was a weird smell he couldn't get rid of no matter what he tried. His writing was a dead end, and his day job was a manager at a bookstore. Nothing about his life was appealing to anyone. Even Beck. He shut the thought down. That was the last person he wanted to have in his head. Isaac, you are. If Sean Winters is scared by a little attention, then he's not good enough for you. It's the same result either way. No, because if he hurts you, then I have to drive up there and hurt him. That startled a laugh out of him. His mother was barely over 5 feet and was all soft, round edges. She didn't even kill spiders. I raised you and I practically raised you-know-how. I can handle a model, his mother insisted. An old ache bloomed in his chest. You can say his name. He doesn't deserve it, his mother said. After what he did. Oh, it still makes me mad. Smiling, he sat up and scooted against the armrest. When the whole fiasco happened, his mother had taken his side, no questions asked. She'd always been in his corner, and he could never find a way to show her how grateful he was. Anyway, his mother went on. How are you really doing with all this? Even one date is a big step for you. I'm disappointed, Isaac admitted. We really clicked last night, and I did want to see where things went with him. You did? Does this mean you'll be dating more? He snorted. With my schedule? Not likely. Retail didn't leave a lot of time for a social life. His only friends these days were his coworkers. It's okay to want to date, you know, his mom said gently. He inhaled sharply. I know. How do I trust people after what he did? I mean, if he of all people cheated on me, why wouldn't everyone else? I knew I didn't punch him hard enough, his mom muttered. What? When did you punch him? Not important. Isaac begged to differ. If his mother was going around punching people, he wanted to know. She refused to elaborate, changing the subject to ask how work was going until she was satisfied she'd cheered him up. Assuring her she had, they hung up and he leaned back into his couch. He sat there for a few minutes and then he opened Twitter on his phone. He couldn't resist reading all the posts about him and Sean, going down the rabbit hole of theories of who he was and where Sean could have met him until he ended up on Sean's Wikipedia page. Fashion seemed to be a family business for him. His father was obvious, but he hadn't realized Sean had 3 older siblings. The oldest had been an up-and-coming designer in his own right until disappearing from the news as a teenager. Sean's sister was a cosmetologist who used to practice on her little brothers, and now was Sean's personal makeup assistant. His second brother was the only one not in the business. His ringtone startled him, and he fumbled the phone while scrambling to answer it. "Hello. Isaac? It's Sean." Isaac's heart pounded. "How'd it go?" Sean took a deep breath. "They said if you're okay with it, we can keep dating." Isaac's jaw hit the floor.
Chapter 6. Sean has meetings.
He couldn't remember the last time he'd been nervous about a PR meeting. Granted, he usually did his best to not show up. They weren't meetings so much as telling him where to go and what to say, which could be covered just as effectively in an email. This time, though, he was the first one in the conference room, pacing the wall of windows until everyone else showed up. The last one to arrive was his father. Sean stopped pacing and stared at him. Eric Winters had a way of taking up the whole room, and not just because of his size. His broad shoulders and height were intimidating enough, but his scowl and heavy steps made sure every eye was on him. Without a word, Eric sat at the head of the table. Sean took his customary seat at his right and hid his shaking hands in his lap. His father was probably furious with him for getting into this mess. "We all know why we're here on a Sunday." Hannah, the lead PR manager, opened. Her long brown hair, usually in a tight bun, was in a loose ponytail today. She slid a printed copy of the article to the middle of the table. "How do you want to deal with it?" "I want it taken down," Sean said immediately. "Whatever you have to do." "That's one option," Hannah agreed. She glanced at Eric and then back to him. "The other is we run with it." "What?"
Sean snapped.
"You continue to take this boy on dates, get your picture taken by the paparazzi. They run constant articles on you and keep you in the forefront of everyone's minds. And by the time Phoenix Industries debuts the fall collection, the world will already be looking." Eric rubbed a hand over his chin. "No," Sean said. "I'm not using him for publicity. That's not fair to him." Eric raised a brow. "You wouldn't have to appear in as many interviews." While that was tempting, Sean stood by his decision. "I won't do it. Take the article down." Hannah looked to Eric for the final say. Sean clenched his fists. He hated that. His father's employees all treated him like a child, like he couldn't make a single decision by himself. It was Eric's world, and they all bowed to him. Eric stared at Sean, tapping his finger on the table. "Does this boy mean something to you?" Sean met his stare. The question sounded like a trap. If he said yes, his father might back down on this ridiculous scheme. Or he'd flip out and demand Sean never see him again. If Sean said no, he'd absolutely push the scheme and probably question why Sean had gone out with him in the first place, which would lead to the mugging incident he hadn't told him about. "Does it matter?" Sean asked instead. "He has nothing to do with any of this." Eric stared for another moment. Sean wished he could read his mind. What was going through his father's head? "How about a deal?" Eric suggested. Sean narrowed his eyes. "What kind of deal?" "You follow through with Hannah's plan. Show up in the tabloids every week, we'll scale back your official appearances. Make it to the fall debut, and I'll terminate your conservatorship." He stopped breathing for a minute. "What?" Sean couldn't have heard that right. His father had enacted that when he was 17, after a minor drunk driving accident. No one had been hurt, but after what happened to his older brother, it was seen as an acceptable precaution. It meant he was stuck working for his father for the rest of his life, and Sean had long ago given up on his father ever relinquishing that control. Why change his mind now? Or was it simply the only thing his father could think of to bribe him? "Really, you have the better end of the deal," Eric went on. "Date a boy you're already interested in, attend fewer interviews, and after the fall show, all your accounts are yours to do with as you please." In return, his father earned free publicity for the entire summer, which would mean higher sales once the collection debuted. "You would really honor this?" Sean asked. Eric had controlled every aspect of Sean's life since he could walk. He didn't trust he'd give it up so easily. "I would," Eric nodded. "As long as you hold up your end of the deal." Sean still didn't believe him. "Why offer this now? You're not as important as you think you are," Eric stated. "There are other models we can take on to keep the public interested. One's less stubborn who will actually show up to photo shoots." His father was sick of his ditching habit. He'd rather cut Sean loose and not deal with him than continue to pay photographers double for rescheduled shoots. But like the bastard he was, he couldn't just give Sean his freedom. Sean had to earn it. This whole thing still wasn't fair to Isaac. Sean didn't want to drag him into this mess, though he'd been pretty unbothered about it this morning. Eric grinned, accepting Sean's silence as his victory. We'll need to know who the boy is, and he'll have to come by and sign NDAs about any work you discuss or designs you show him.
Sean nodded.
He was really going to do this. Yes, he'd wanted to date Isaac anyway, but not like this. He was going to use the nicest person he'd ever met to earn his own freedom. Well, he'd never claimed to be a decent human being. He'd just have to make it up to Isaac after the fall show. Chapter 7. Twitter was a mistake. By the second date that Wednesday, Phoenix Industries released a statement confirming that yes, Sean Winters was dating another man, and that man was Isaac Green. By the time their date ended at midnight, Isaac's Twitter follower count had doubled, and his name was trending 3 spots below Sean's. He dropped his phone on his face in bed. He shouldn't have checked it, not when he had a morning shift in a few hours. But he was still floating on cloud 9 after their date, and he couldn't resist checking one last time. Clearly, he'd underestimated what dating Sean Winters would be like. On Sunday, he'd gone into Phoenix Industries to sign non-disclosure agreements, promising not to reveal company secrets or any humiliating facts about Sean, and they'd given him a cheat sheet on what to say when reporters approached him. When not if. The prospect terrified him. At least the fact he was the world's most average person wasn't an issue. The PR person hadn't given a damn who he was. Sean especially seemed determined to prove it was fine. Isaac suggested a movie for their second date, something dark and impossible to take pictures in. Instead, Sean brought him to a 50s-themed ice cream shop, and they sat by the windows in booths shaped like old classic cars. Are you sure you don't want to move somewhere more private? Isaac had asked. He was grateful he'd gotten a bowl of strawberry and chocolate, less likelihood of making a mess all over himself. Positive, Sean replied, waving at a girl shamelessly taking their picture across the street. I'm not ashamed of you, Isaac. I didn't mean to make you think I was the other day. He dipped his spoon in his chocolate chip cookie dough. Isaac hadn't been able to argue after that, and he'd done his best to ignore the pedestrians ogling them through the window. It was just something he'd have to get used to dating Sean. And other than feeling like he was on display, the date was spectacular. They talked about food, and Isaac learned Sean was actually a decent cook. He'd taught himself how to make healthier versions of his favorites to meet his strict diet requirements, and then found he genuinely enjoyed it. Should you be eating ice cream? Isaac had asked. One bowl of ice cream isn't going to do anything, Sean replied. Then Isaac told him about his mom's cooking talents, and how they were not hereditary. Sean offered to teach him sometime, and the mental image of Sean in his kitchen, smooth voice guiding him through the steps of lasagna, made the tips of his ears burn. That was one thing all the pictures and articles couldn't describe about Sean, his honey-sweet baritone. It was all so different from Isaac's last relationship. Sean's quiet interest was intense and focused. No matter how long Isaac rambled, he'd have a relevant comment or question when Isaac stopped. Beck had liked to argue, and their dates tended to be things like hiking or basketball, or other competitive activities. His boundless energy was a complete opposite to Sean, who was perfectly happy to sit in the ice cream shop until they closed, and then wander the city until they couldn't stop yawning. Isaac blushed just thinking about it. Sean was the first person in a long time who so genuinely wanted to spend time with him. Was he crazy to think he had a shot in the long run? That someone elegant and important saw something in him worth keeping? Or was he setting himself up for another cataclysmic heartbreak? He had a feeling it was the latter, but it didn't stop his heart from racing when he thought of Sean, or the dopey smile that spread over his face when he picked his phone up again and saw them trending on Twitter. So maybe Isaac had deliberately opened the app after getting ready for bed, and turning all the lights off. He wanted to see the pictures he knew people had taken of them. They were objectively cute. The main one circulating depicted Isaac waving his hands as he described something, and Sean smiling at him. He made the mistake of reading the comments. At Queen off threes. OMG, Sean's new beau is adorable. I just want to pinch his cheeks. At Mrs. Snow. Sean is gay?
I'm devastated.
Worst news ever. Chapter 8. Puppies make everything better. Of all the things Sean had done for his career, dating Isaac was the most enjoyable. As long as he didn't think about the ulterior motives fueling him. But for the most part, whenever he was around the other man, he felt peace and something he might dare call happiness. Isaac's cheery smiles were infectious. Deliberately being spotted by fans and reporters was a pain. Sean had to drag out their walks, or leak their date locations to the paparazzi so they'd be there waiting. Media appearances were hands down the worst part of his career, and his stomach felt like a beehive when Isaac curled up behind him at the attention. He put an arm around Isaac's shoulders, tucking him against his side, and pressed a kiss to Isaac's temple. Cameras flashed. It's all right, just smile and wave. I'll talk. Nodding, he put on a watery smile and lifted a shaking hand. Sean fed the reporter some basic lines about their date at the skating rink behind them before forcing their way through the parking lot. Isaac had tried so hard to disguise him too, bringing a pair of wide sunglasses and a thick wool scarf. Of course, when Sean's goal was to be spotted, it was a wasted effort. But the paparazzi knew to look for them thanks to the tip he'd sent their online forums, and they'd been waiting when he and Isaac stepped outside. The kicker was that they hadn't recognized Sean. They'd recognized Isaac and pieced it together. He owed Isaac half of his bank account when this was over. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. Isaac dragged his hands over his face. Doesn't the world have better things to do than hear about us skating? Of course they do, Sean said. He pulled open the passenger door to his car. A basic Honda Civic that looked like all the others and disappeared in traffic. But people are weirdly obsessed with what celebrities do outside work, and if it gets views on a website, paparazzi will go for it. Isaac rubbed his forehead and ducked into the seat. The media is bizarre. Laughing, Sean shut the door and walked around to slide into the driver's seat. On the topic of media presence, I have a favor to ask. I'm terrified of what's about to come out of your mouth. He snorted. You'll have fun, I promise. I'm doing a fundraiser at the Tuleta Animal Shelter in a few days. Would you come with me? Isaac pulled out his phone and opened his work schedule. I'll check if I can switch shifts. What would it entail exactly? Playing with puppies. Narrowed eyes looked over at him. I'm serious. If we play with puppies and the shelter posts pictures of us, it helps the animals get adopted. Or if people can't adopt, they donate. It can't be that easy. So will you come? Will I come with you to play with puppies? Are you serious? I will close the store for the day if I have to, I'll be there. Sean laughed and finally started the car to drive Isaac home. Beside him, Isaac continued to mutter as he texted his coworkers to see who could take his shift. This at least wasn't an appearance he had to feel guilty about. 3 days later found both of them at the Tuleta Animal Shelter. Isaac wore paint-stained jeans and a faded blue polo shirt. Sean's jeans and animal shelter t-shirt were bought specifically for the day. Thanks so much for coming, the shelter manager Georgia said. She wore the same black t-shirt he did and had braided blonde hair. It's our pleasure, Sean said honestly. The shelter had set up a mock photo shoot in their yard, and a few dogs were already running around and sniffing the equipment. Isaac bounced next to him. Laughing, Georgia invited them to step inside. Do you mind if we take videos too? Some of the dogs don't sit still well. It's fine with me, Sean said. Isaac. Yeah, that's okay. Oh my gosh, Sean, this dog is so fluffy. Isaac had buried his hands in the fur of a golden doodle. A Pomeranian jumped at his ankles, and a border collie jumped on the golden doodle for his attention. Oh gosh, hi guys. A German shepherd distracted Sean, knocking right into his legs and threatening to push him over. That dog was followed by a pit bull, and another breed Sean didn't know. We're going to start taking pictures, Georgia warned. They both gave the green light, but neither one noticed when the camera started flashing. The German shepherd did eventually knock Sean on his ass, and his lap was instantly full of dog. One of them licked his face, messing up his hair, and he could only imagine the photos the shelter took of this. After the initial canine rush, the dogs calmed down a bit and started wandering the yard. That was when they took posed photos with individual dogs, which would be uploaded on their social media with the dog's information encouraging people to adopt. This is the best date ever, Isaac told him. They'd gotten a bit of a break to sit in the shade while the dogs piled around them. Sorry, but you'll never top this. He wrestled the Pomeranian for a rope toy. Maybe we'll just come here every week, Sean joked. Or I'll buy you all the dogs here. Once he had access to his bank accounts, he'd be able to afford it. Isaac snorted. You'll need to buy me a house to put them in first. My apartment would collapse with this many dogs. There's an idea. He'd buy a huge house with a lot of open land, and turn it into an animal sanctuary. He and Isaac could play with the dogs all day, and Isaac could write compelling articles to support them, and they'd live off the royalties his published books would earn. It came together so easily in his head, a future beyond his modeling career, something he actually wanted to do. It's a little early to go buying me a house, Isaac said. He scooped the Pomeranian into his lap, tugging lightly on the rope toy still in its jaws.
Sean hummed.
What about an animal sanctuary? We could open one together, after the Phoenix Autumn Fashion Show. Isaac stared at him, mouth hanging open. You'd be good with the animals, and your writing could support us after my accounts are used up. He didn't know how much exactly he had saved up, or what his father had left alone. They could make it work though, he was sure. The look on Isaac's face though was not about the money. Oh no. He shouldn't have said anything. They'd only been together for 3 weeks. Was that too soon to bring up something like this? Did Isaac not see them together in the future? What right did Sean have to go suggesting something like this anyway? He was using Isaac for his own goals, dragging him in front of cameras he clearly hated and drawing all of Twitter's worst to himself. Sean was a selfish idiot. And he'd probably just ruined everything. Chapter 9. Puppies did not make this better. Isaac stared. The Pomeranian in his lap yanked on the rope toy, tearing it from his grip. Still Isaac stared. He must have misunderstood what Sean meant. They'd only been together for 3 weeks. They hardly knew each other. Sean couldn't be imagining a real future together already. It was just one of those passive thoughts, it didn't mean anything. Sean wasn't serious. Except as Isaac stared silent, Sean's eyes went wide and the color drained from his face. I was being foolish, forget I said anything. Sean looked away, fidgeting with a rubber bone. You? Isaac didn't know what he wanted to say first. Didn't know what he wanted to ask, or what answer he could handle hearing. Sharp pain pricked his hand. He jerked in surprise, tearing free from the Pomeranian who'd grown bored of the rope toy. Ow! Isaac! Sean leaned over, reaching for his hand. The dog had bit around his thumb, and needle points of pain stung in the crevice between his thumb and first finger. I'm all right, Isaac said, examining the wound. The bite surprised him, but it wouldn't even hurt so much if the dog had been a few centimeters lower, or if Isaac hadn't dragged his hand free. One of the teeth had caught and scraped across his knuckle, and tiny drops of blood trailed down to his wrist. Is that blood? Sean asked, voice shaky. Isaac hummed, waving over one of the shelter workers watching them. Sean whimpered, and then his head collided with Isaac's shoulder. Wah hey, Sean. What happened? The worker asked. Sean's head rolled off his shoulder and he fell back on the ground. Sean. Isaac twisted around. One of the dogs nosed at Sean's neck, and the Pomeranian jumped onto Sean's stomach. Sean's eyes scrunched together. Oh dear, the worker said. She jumped in to shoo the dogs away and tapped Sean's face. Mr. Winters? Please wake up. Isaac pushed a German shepherd aside, raising his bloody hand out of their reach. Georgia ran in with a first aid kit, and as the other worker roused Sean, she cleaned up Isaac's hand and plastered bright zoo-themed band-aids around Isaac's thumb. Groaning, Sean let the worker sit him up and held a hand to the back of his head. What happened? Good question. Isaac glanced down at his hand. I think you passed out when you saw the blood. It hadn't even been a lot. When his heart rate returned to normal, Isaac would laugh at how little blood it had taken to freak Sean out.
Sean grimaced.
Unfortunate. I'm going to call in a paramedic, Georgia said. She cracked a cold pack and handed it to Sean, who wordlessly placed it against his head. I don't need one, Sean argued. You hit your head, and were unconscious for a few seconds. Not negotiable. If it makes you feel better, it's more for liability issues than because I think you actually need it. Sean didn't argue after that, and when they stood up and he swayed on his feet, Isaac was grateful Georgia was already on the phone. Arm around Sean's waist, Isaac led him inside the shelter to the reception room, and eased him into one of the plastic chairs. He was too restless to sit himself, and chose instead to shift from foot to foot in front of him. Sorry. I ruined the best date ever, Sean said. Isaac shook his head. I was bleeding first, it's not your fault. He hummed. Yeah, but I distracted you with that question. Still my fault. Right. The question about opening an animal sanctuary together after some fashion show in the fall. Isaac flexed his hand, feeling the band-aid stretch and pull. You don't have to answer, Sean said. Please forget I brought it up. It just surprised me, that's all. Part of him still thought of their fledgling relationship like a dream. It was too good to be true. How could he picture them together a year from now when he expected Sean to call it off any moment? The worker came in with 2 bottles of water. Is there anything I can get for you? Food, blankets, anything. We're all right, thank you, Isaac said. She nodded. The paramedic should only be a few more minutes. Thanks. They were left alone again after that. Sean fiddled with his water bottle. I don't want things to be weird between us. You're the best thing to happen in my life in a long time. Alright, Isaac didn't know what he did to fool Sean. But they were going way too deep, way too fast. This was a car wreck waiting to happen. I'm not that amazing. Yes, you are. Isaac shook his head. I'm really not. He thought of the 20 rejection emails sitting in his inbox, how 90% of the contacts in his phone were coworkers, how, even 2 years later, he couldn't bring himself to visit his own mother at home in case Beck was in the neighborhood. Then we match. Sean reached for Isaac's hand. People like me because of a fluke in genetics. I never would have ended up where I am in a different family. Take away the brand name and fame. There's nothing special left. Oh God. Isaac wanted to counter that statement with all the wonderful things he'd learned about Sean, which would only prove his point and lead this car wreck of a relationship to disaster that much faster. Sean squeezed his hand and smiled up at him. That soft smile reserved for quiet moments like this, away from the cameras. He couldn't do this. If Isaac let himself fall any further, he wouldn't be able to pick up the pieces of his broken heart when this went south. I have to go. He ripped his hand free and ran out the Chapter 10. Sean is ghosted. The door eased shut, shutting softly. With dogs barking in the background, and his pulse racing in his ears, Sean didn't even hear the bell jingle. Damn it, he muttered, shutting his eyes and leaning his head back against the wall. He'd done something wrong, obviously. Was it talking about the animal sanctuary? Had he come on too strongly by telling Isaac he was amazing? Or had admitting he wasn't special what did it? Hell, maybe fainting at a little blood ruined it. Too many options. His head hurt too much to sort through it all. Georgia strode into the room, aiming for the doors. She stopped when she saw him alone though. What happened to Isaac? His mouth went dry. He had to go. Georgia frowned. So he just left you alone with a possible head injury? What a jerk.
Sean bristled.
The head injury isn't that bad, and something came up. Lay off. Raising her hands, she backed down. If you say so. Paramedics will be here any second. Don't pass out or anything while I'm outside. I'll do my best. She continued through the front door, only to return 2 minutes later with the promised medics. A quick evaluation later, and Sean was given a clean bill of health. No concussion or other head injury to speak of. He was even allowed to drive home if felt up to it. I can finish the program, he offered. There were a few dogs they hadn't posed with yet, and he'd been hoping to see the cats too. I think it's better we call it early today, Georgia said. We can reschedule the rest. He wasn't up for arguing with her, so he dragged himself to his car and carefully drove home. His father was still at his studio, leaving Sean alone to wallow in his misery. The house always felt too big these days. Even when all 6 of them had been there, they couldn't fill all the empty space. Now that everyone else had gone, leaving only him and his father, the emptiness crept inside him. His sister Luna visited sometimes, but Nick swore never to set foot in their home again. Maybe Tyler would return one day. But at this point Sean wasn't holding his breath. He half believed Tyler had died and no one told him. He sank into one of the couches in the living room, staring up at the elevated ceiling. His chest ached, and in the back of his mind he wondered if this was what heartbreak felt like. If he'd already chased Isaac off for good, then he'd also lost his chance at freedom. The autumn fashion show was still 4 months away. There was no way his father would honor their bargain with this much time left. That thought scared him as much as never speaking to Isaac again. He had to try and figure out what happened. Maybe he could fix it. No, he would fix it. Whatever it took. To start, he texted Isaac to let him know he was okay and had gotten home safe. That went unanswered throughout the night. Not a good sign. The next day, he screenshotted his favorite picture of the 2 of them at the shelter and sent it to Isaac. He couldn't think of a caption, so he sent it without one. This also went unanswered. Sean asked how Isaac's day was going, if his store manager still made him want to scream, if he wanted to go out for ice cream again or go see a movie. After a week he sent apologies, pleading for Isaac to at least respond. He won't answer, he told Luna dejectedly. At a loss for what else to do, he'd run to his older sister's apartment. She already knew about their father's bargain, and with 2 weeks of silence from Isaac he was ready to panic. Tell me again what happened at the shelter, she said, putting mugs of hot chocolate down in front of them. She wore a cozy bright yellow sweater, and her dark brown hair was in a messy bun. She'd foregone her makeup and contacts today, and wore her purple-rimmed glasses. He wrapped his hands around the mug. Her apartment felt more like home than their house did. The kitchen was a little cramped, the table pushed into the corner with 2 chairs squeezed around it, but the view from the patio off the living room was amazing, overlooking downtown. Recounting the day at the shelter, He curled over his mug and breathed in the sweet scent of chocolate and melted marshmallows. So, you asked if he wanted to move in with you at the end of the year? Luna asked. His head shot up. What?
No.
How'd you come up with that? The animal sanctuary? You want to buy a house with him and live together to take care of a bunch of animals. That's a long-term thing. Maybe he's scared of that kind of commitment. You think? Thank God for his older sister. He was ready to break down sobbing over this entire thing, and she came at him with calm logic and reason. Yep. Though abandoning you at the shelter and ghosting you for 2 weeks isn't cool. Make sure he apologizes for that. Sean couldn't care less if Isaac apologized, so long as Isaac spoke with him again. What should I do though? You just have to talk to him. Be honest about what you want from the relationship and listen to what he wants. I can't be honest without mentioning Dad's deal. She grimaced. Right. I wish I could say telling him was a good idea, but after this it might not be. Sean didn't like admitting to himself he was using Isaac. There was no way he could confess to Isaac. Even if Isaac was miraculously okay with it, it would turn their relationship into something fake. At least when he was the only one who knew about it, he could still pretend it was all real. Still, Luna went on, you're going to have to talk to him. If he won't come to you, you'll have to go to him.
Sean añadid.
He knew where Isaac worked. Shouldn't be hard to show up at a time when he was working. And if Isaac was on the clock, he couldn't. Chapter 11. Sorting DVDs and Feelings. Isaac's Barnes & Nobles was one of the few that still had a dedicated music and movies section. One of the outer dividing walls displayed their overflow bargain kits, and calling the handful of disorganized shelves a music selection was generous, but they had a decent selection of records and movies. The best part? This section was deserted most of the day. When Isaac didn't want to deal with his coworkers or the customers, he'd find a project to do back here. He'd spent the better part of the last 2 weeks reorganizing the DVDs and marking the new sale prices. Today he had new shelving to put away, and he sorted the genres on the counter next to register. Excuse me? A customer asked. He looked up in surprise. Normally he noticed when customers entered the department, but this one snuck up on him. Then he saw who the customer was and he flailed, trying to put the DVD in his hand on the stack, missing, and knocking the pile off the desk entirely.
Sean.
Isaac couldn't face Sean in a text, despite the other man trying desperately to hear from him. He should have expected Sean to come into the store, but somehow he'd gotten it in his head that if he never responded, Sean would give up and they'd never see each other again. Whether or not that was what Isaac wanted, he was too coward to figure out what he wanted. Sean winced and kneeled down to pick up the DVDs. He was in plain jeans and a gray hoodie, sunglasses pushed up into his hair. For Sean, it was an outfit that made him invisible in the crowd. He hadn't wanted people to know he was here. I'm sorry, Sean said. I know I shouldn't bother you at work, but I didn't know what else to do. Isaac dropped down to clean up his mess. No, I'm sorry. I should have handled that better. I have a habit of running away from my problems. It had yet to work, but old habits die hard. Sean stacked a DVD on his pile and looked up at him. I don't want to be a problem for you. Can you tell me what I did? Oh, his stomach felt like a beehive. He'd been a massive dick to Sean, so wrapped up in his own head and fears he hadn't considered how Sean would feel. Or, he had, but it was the Sean he expected a famous supermodel to be, not the real one who constantly acted in complete opposition. God, I really screwed this up, I'm sorry, Isaac said. He clutched the sandlot until plastic creaked. Sean eased his fingers over Isaac's. I talked to my sister about what happened at the shelter. She said it sounded like I scared you talking about the future. If I did, I apologize. No, it's not your fault. Isaac shook his head. That's the whole point of dating, to see if you'd be a good fit in the long run. And just because I'm terrified of what could happen before then doesn't mean you should be. Sean furrowed his brow. I'm not sure I follow. Sighing, Isaac sat cross-legged. He kept his focus on the DVDs, resorting them by genre as he talked. I was in a long-term relationship before. Beck was my first boyfriend, and I thought he'd be the only one. His hand shook, and he could hardly swallow past the lump in his throat. I'm guessing it didn't work out, Sean stated. Isaac laughed, dry and humorless. No, it didn't. I caught him cheating on me and... He swiped at his eyes. Damn it. It's been 2 years, you'd think I'd stop crying over it. 2 years isn't that long at all, really, Sean said. He took over sorting the DVDs. I don't think you want me crying over my ex, Isaac said. Preferably, you wouldn't be crying at all. But I'm not going to tell you how to grieve. You lost more than just a boyfriend when he cheated on you. Sean didn't even know how true that statement was. Isaac had lost the future he and Beck had planned together, and a lifetime of friendship. Since Isaac still wouldn't go home on the off chance he ran into Beck, he'd lost that as well. It hurt what he did to me. I missed my own college graduation because I was such a mess, and my mom has to come here for the holidays because our families used to celebrate together. His mother was a saint for doing what she did for him. You're so incredible. I can't see how anything between us will end any differently. It still baffles me that you want to be around me, and then you said you wanted something permanent like the animal sanctuary. I realize we're already deeper into this relationship than I ever thought we'd get. And the deeper we go, the more it's going to hurt when you want to end things. His vision was blurry again and he rubbed at his eyes. Sean took his time answering. You seem pretty convinced that I'd be the one who wants to break up with you. Well, yeah, Isaac said. You're you. You're sweet. And you have a hilarious sense of humor that no one else knows about. You've read more books than I have. You're graceful. You do all kinds of charity work, which is why I know you're serious about the sanctuary thing, because that sounds exactly like something you do. He'd done the research before they'd gone to the shelter, surprising himself by learning Sean participated in as many charity events as fashion shows. I'm not like that. You'll get bored dating someone like me, and I'm scared of how much it will hurt. He couldn't meet Sean's eyes. Picking up the stacks, he started putting them on the counter again. Back to Sean, he finished with, it's better to just end it now, right? Before things get worse. Chapter 12. Isaac's comfort is Sean's despair. No, it is not better, Sean declared. Did Isaac really think that? He knew celebrities had fickle reputations, but he thought he'd proved to be different over the years. Though, he didn't have much room to talk considering the deal he'd made with his father. What he could say to make this better without being an outright liar. I told you before, I'm not that special. You're the one who rushed into a dangerous situation to save a stranger's life. That's more impressive than everything I've done. And you have the patience to work in retail full-time, and the dedication to write a book on top of that. Those are major accomplishments. Isaac's face started to redden, and he turned to face the counter and put his back to Sean. Sean pulled on Isaac's shoulder and made him turn around. You're so happy all the time, it makes everyone around you happy. I love your smile and the way you talk. He wished he could promise not to get bored of him and break his heart, but that wasn't something he felt safe promising, not when he couldn't bring himself to tell Isaac about the deal. Even telling Isaac about the deal right now would only hurt him. It would prove all his fears right, and Sean might not be lucky enough to find him at work again. Isaac's face was beet red. He threw his hands over his face and leaned back, knocking the DVDs over the other side. You can't just say that. Sean raised a brow. Isaac had just done the same thing. He tugged Isaac's hands away from his face. I'm not going to pressure you into anything. We can take things as slow as you want, okay? I've been thinking about the future a lot because the fall show might be my last one. It doesn't have to mean anything you don't want it to. Isaac searched his face. You won't be mad if it takes a while to be intimate? Sean's face flushed. That was a line he wouldn't cross until after the fashion show, if by some miracle Isaac still wanted to be around him at that point. Only if you promise not to be mad if I take even longer. Giggling, Isaac leaned his forehead on Sean's shoulder. I'm sorry for ghosting you. That was immature. Sean wrapped his arms around Isaac's waist, resting his cheek on fluffy curls. I brought it upon myself talking about the future only 3 weeks into our relationship. Yeah, that's a little soon, Isaac agreed in a strained, high-pitched voice. He pulled his head back a little to meet his eyes. But you said this fall show might be your last one?
Sean hammed.
I'm kind of in a contract with my dad. I can't work for other companies without his approval, and I don't have any other skills to try and strike out on my own. His conservatorship meant his father had control over when and where he worked, and who he worked for, and his father was not the kind of man to let Sean work for anyone else. And the contract is up this fall? Isaac guessed. More or less. My dad is willing to end the contract early, so for the first time I'm actually able to think of what else I want to do with my life. Isaac nodded. That's exciting and terrifying. It's like college graduation. I guess it is a little like that. And your first big plan was a charity, Isaac teased. You're too good for this world. That is a lie. I want an excuse to play with dogs all day. There's nothing selfless about it. Isaac laughed. Well, I can't say I blame you. Playing with dogs all day sounds like a dream come true. It would be better with Isaac at his side, but he couldn't expect that of him. It wasn't Isaac's dream to run an animal sanctuary, and once Sean was free, he didn't know if he'd be able to look Isaac in the eye. Isaac pulled away from him to round the counter and pick up the DVDs he knocked over, and Sean tried not to throw up. It was the last thing he wanted to do, but he was going to break Isaac's heart. Isaac was the pure one in their relationship, and he just bared his fears and insecurities to Sean. Sean had already felt like the worst human being on the planet using him for his own gain, but now he was sure of it. He'd earn his freedom and finally have a life he chose, and he would destroy Isaac to do it. Either Isaac would find out about the deal somehow, or Sean wouldn't be able to face him after the show, confirming everything Isaac thought about him. Damn his father. He'd wanted to date Isaac honestly, and this could have been a real thing between them. He could have sheltered Isaac from the media, kept him out of the tabloids as much as possible. He could have been as happy as Isaac, instead of feeling like the pit in his stomach would swallow him whole. Was it even worth it to go through with this? Maybe he should call the whole thing off now, save both of them from the inevitable heartbreak. He'd put up with his father this long. He could do it for a few more years. The thought of things staying as they were sickened him. He was so close to freedom, practically had one foot out the door already. He couldn't give up now. He'd mitigate the damage as much as he could, keep Isaac out of the worst of it, and figure out a way to deal with the rest. In the long run, this would be for the best. He had to believe. Chapter 13, Sunflowers for the Sunflower. At Queen Off 3's. This animal shelter photoshoot is my favorite thing in the world. At All Day All Night. Sean should always carry a puppy. It looks so right. At Winter Slide. He's still dating this dweeb? What a loser, maybe he's also a charity case. At I See Dog. Here we are, proof dogs make anyone look good. Those were the tamer comments Isaac found on Twitter. He tweeted about his writing fairly often, trying to build an audience for his future publishing dreams. But now those posts were being torn to shreds by what he assumed were jealous fans of Sean. Any selfies he uploaded were called ugly and revolting. Since he blocked direct messages, people left comments on any post of his they could find, demanding to know how he bribed Sean and got his attention. Rubbing his hands over his face, he put his phone face down on his desk. He only checked Twitter on his breaks at work now, since he'd be forced to put it down after 15 minutes and focus on something else. He didn't know why he bothered, really. It always upset him to read the hateful things people said about him. It was like all his insecurities personified in these strangers' posts. Not all were bad, of course. He had decent support from the online world going to war in the comments and telling people to mind their own business. Those people were harder to remember, though. The timer on his phone buzzed, signaling the end of his break. He silenced the alarm, took a deep breath, and put on his customer service persona before walking out on the sales floor. If there was one good thing about never having enough staff, it was that it kept Isaac busy. Between helping all the customers and shelving, he was able to push the online world to the back of his mind. He was helping an older man in the history section when he saw Sean walk in, a bouquet of sunflowers and bluebells in his hand. Isaac slapped a hand over his face. Not again. It was incredibly sweet and romantic, and it made Isaac weak in the knees when he thought about it. But he already had 4 other bouquets in his apartment, and a stack of chocolate boxes. Sean had made it a habit to surprise him at work with little gifts like these. His way of proving Isaac was special to him, Isaac assumed. "Pardon?" the customer asked. "No, not you. I'm sorry, could you excuse me?" He hadn't been much help recommending books about the early American rail system anyway. Not waiting for an answer, Isaac stepped away from the customer and met Sean in the aisle. Sean presented the flowers, smiling sweetly. "Sunflowers for my sunflower." Isaac's face burned, and he made an embarrassing keening sound. How could Sean say that with such a straight face? "Thank you." He took the flowers, staring at a big sunflower instead of making eye contact with his boyfriend. He couldn't decide if he liked these surprise visits or not. On the one hand, it distracted him from his job. The customer he'd abandoned in history could file a complaint, and Isaac could get in trouble. On the other, it really was sweet of Sean to stop by so often, and it did make Isaac feel special. Beck had only done things like this on anniversaries or special occasions, and he'd always acted like he hated it. Sean embraced the act wholeheartedly. He was happy enough to give these gifts, and he never looked for a reason. He wanted to, and that was enough. Being important enough to someone that they wanted to surprise him like this all the time was unbelievable and wonderful. Sean reached up to tuck one of Isaac's curls behind his ear. "It's my pleasure. When do you get off work today?" 5:30. "Perfect. Want to get dinner? There's a new Greek place." It didn't matter where they went. Isaac would be just as happy at McDonald's or an old diner as any fancy place Sean knew of. "Sounds great."
Sean smiled.
Isaac's heart pounded. Every day that smile grew a little wider. When they'd first met, Sean's real smile was nothing more than a twitch at the corners of his mouth. Now his whole face relaxed and his eyes lit up. It was exciting to see Sean's walls come down, little by little. "Excuse me, I was wondering if you had a certain book?" The old man Isaac had been helping earlier interrupted. Isaac jolted and almost crushed the flower in his hand. "Of course, sir. I'll check our computer." He waved to Sean as he led the man to customer service, resting his flowers on the counter. For the remaining 2 hours of his shift, they brought a dopey grin to his face every time he saw them. After dinner, and after Isaac went home and used half his glasses to put the flowers from the bouquet in, he settled on his couch with his phone and the TV remote. He had a new email, which he ignored while finding a movie to watch, finally settling on one of the Marvel films. He expected the email to be junk, but it was from the same email address of the last agent he sent his manuscript to. Heart-pounding, he opened the email. "Dear Isaac Green, I hope you are doing well these days. I've had more time to think about the manuscript you sent before, and I think my initial judgment was mistaken. If you're still searching for an agent, I'd be happy to represent you. Let me know if you're interested and we'll work out the details. Sincerely, Don Malaz, Griffin Literary Agency." He grabbed a pillow to muffle his shrieking. They want to represent him. They accepted his manuscript. This was it. This was how his dreams came true. It was actually going to happen. Energy pulsed through him. He had to stand and pace his tiny living room, shaking his hands out. Okay, this is unbelievable. Oh my God. An agent reaching out to him after initially rejecting him? He'd never heard of one doing that before. His story must have stayed with the man, which was everything Isaac could ask of his book. Still, a seed of doubt planted itself in his mind, his usual insecurities looking for the trick. Why now? It had been almost 2 months since they rejected Isaac's story, and he'd heard the horror stories of how many submissions agents receive in a day. Had his story really been good enough to stand out after initially failing? What made his story worth representing now? He stopped pacing. He knew exactly why Griffin Agency reached out to him. His name trended on Twitter every week. He was constantly in the tabloids next to a supermodel. If a publishing house wanted to sell a book, celebrity endorsement was a guaranteed strategy. They didn't want his book because they thought it was amazing. They wanted it because it was an easy sale. They wanted to take advantage of his publicity and line their own pockets. His excitement twisted and soured, turning into disgust and anger. He still had too much energy and he didn't know what to do with it. The whole apartment smelled like a flower garden, and everywhere he looked he saw another bouquet. They were a physical reminder of his boyfriend's status, and if he didn't want to do something he would regret in the morning, he needed to leave. Phone clutched in his hand, he stormed out of his apartment with the TV still on.